Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. We interview the world's leading apologists to provide credible answers to curious questions. Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. My name is Bobby Conway. I am here with Dr. Frank Turek, Christian apologist and author. It's good to have you on the program, Frank.
Bobby, always great to be with you.
One of the things that I like to do when we get people in the studio is just get them unplugged, and that is to say, just let's push pause before we jump into all the questions, and let's get a little bit of the life story of the apologist that I'm interviewing. And I ask a very similar set of questions, but I think it helps our audience just to kind of grasp who this person is that I'm talking to. So if you wouldn't mind, Frank, just as we kind of just take a little journey down your story and look at your life, just tell us a little bit how you came to know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and how you grew up and what life was like for you.
Yeah, I grew up on the Jersey Shore. Forget about it. I always believed in God. I went to Catholic high school, but I didn't really know who Jesus was. It wasn't really clear to me. And so after college, I got into the Navy. I went through Navy ROTC, and I was in flight school, navigator school, with a friend who I'd met there, who happened to be the son of a Methodist minister. And he began to take me to a Baptist service. Look, I was open. I just wanted to learn. And I was amazed how much I learned in that service. And then I had questions, apologetic questions. If God, why evil? How could Jesus be the only way? Questions like that. And he got me books by Josh McDowell, Evidence Demands a Verdict, More Than a Carpenter, and I began to read those books, and that's how I came to faith. So once I got done with the Navy back in 1992, I began to take a class at a church outside of Washington, D.C. called McLean Bible Church. It happened to be a layperson's apologetics class. Barry Leventhal was the instructor. And I'm in this class, and he invited Dr. Norman Geisler to come in and lecture over a weekend there. And I didn't know who Geisler was. I got one of his books, but I agreed to put him up in our house. And then I realized he was kind of the Michael Jordan of apologetics. And he came to the house, and I enjoyed his seminar, and he invited us to come down to Charlotte and check out the new seminary he had begun down there called Southern Evangelical Seminary. And I thought to myself, look, I'm interested in apologetics. Suppose I was interested in basketball. And Michael Jordan came to my house and said, look, if you're interested in basketball, I got a camp down in North Carolina. I'll teach you how to play. Would I go? Well, of course. So here's Geyser, kind of the Michael Jordan of apologetics. He invites us down. So in 1993, we moved down to Charlotte, North Carolina to go to Southern Evangelical Seminary. And that's how I got into apologetics in more of a vocational way. Now, for most of the past 20 years, I've been doing apologetics on the side. I've been doing leadership training and sales training and team building for companies. That put me all through seminary and even into the ministry. But only recently have I begun to do crossexamined.org much more full time. And over that period of time, I've written a few books, a couple with Dr. Geyser. One's called Legislating Morality, another's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I've also written on my own, Correct, Not Politically Correct. And there's a new one coming out soon as well. And we've got a curriculum that I helped write as well. So that's kind of my story.
So how did it work out for you and Dr. Geyser to start writing together? You would just hear him and kind of say, hey, let's write some books
Yeah,
together.
well, it was such a small school at the time, SES, and it's still relatively small, that, you could get to know the professors quite well. And we were actually, my wife was selling Dr. Geyser's books and tapes, and I would go to seminars with him and do some of the presenting. And I remember him once giving a lecture on legislating morality. It was like before the 1992, or before one of the elections. It was probably 1994 or something like that. And he talked about how all laws legislate morality. It was actually 1996 now that I think about it. And I said, that needs to be a book. So I went to him and I said, we ought to write a book on that, legislating morality. And so that's where that came from. And then he and I were doing a program called The 12 Points That Show Christianity is True at churches all over the country. And I said, this needs to be a book too. And we called it I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
Yeah, I love that title. I think it's a phenomenal title. Frank, when you think of apologetics today, what are some of the big apologetic issues? If you kind of had to say, man, these are the ones we really need to know, what are those?
There's only 4 that we really pound on in our seminars. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament reliable? If you answer yes to those 4 questions, truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament, then Christianity necessarily follows. You get the Old Testament if the New Testament is true, because Jesus, who's in the New Testament, affirms the Old Testament. And if he's God, whatever he teaches is true. So just by those 4 questions, truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament, If you answer yes, Christianity follows. Then in addition to those 4 questions, you get 4 objections, and they all begin with the letter E. You get evil, evolution, ethics, and eternity. So under evil, if God, why evil? Under evolution, well, doesn't evolution disprove God? Under eternity, you'll get, well, am I going to hell just because I don't believe in Jesus? Or what about those that have never heard? And under ethics, you'll get questions like the Canaanites in the Old Testament, or issues like homosexuality, abortion, those kind of questions. So those 4 questions, truth, God, miracles in the New Testament, make the positive case. And then the 4 E's are normally the pushback objections that you need to deal with.
Is there a particular resource that you would encourage people to consider, or maybe a handful that would help them to kind of beef up in those areas?
Sure. Obviously, our book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, is very good. There's a curriculum and a DVD set that goes with it. The new app that we have, the Cross-Examined app, has a lot of quick answers to it. It also has all of our podcasts that we do every week that you can just listen to them at your leisure. I would also recommend a lot of books, but if I had to just get one that would be helpful in talking to other people about these issues, would be Greg Koukl's book, Tactics. You definitely want to get that. Anything by Lee Strobel is very accessible. On Guard by William Lane Craig. Of course, Mere Christianity. You have to have that under your belt out there. So those are the main books that I would recommend. I'd obviously recommend all the great work you're doing at the 1 Minute Apologist, because you can get quick answers from some of the best apologists very quickly. I would go to reasonablefaith.org. I'd go to str.org. I'd go to the Discovery Institute, discovery.org, for issues of creation, evolution. So there's a lot of Apologetics 315, as you know, is an amazing website. So it's a crossroads of all sorts of apologetics. So there's plenty of resources out there, and everything I just mentioned is on our website, crossexamined.org. All those links are right there. So that's where I would go.
Yeah, you on your app, don't you have a page, Frank, that kind of lets people know, like, man, here's all the hot spots to go to?
That's right. That's right. They can go right to the website and click on links and get the answers they need. Let me also mention, too, that I think that if people are really interested in apologetics, they ought to get formally trained in it. They ought to go to ses.edu, or go to Biola, or a school that has a good apologetics program.
Yeah. What were some of your most influential apologists or philosophers in your life, and books as well?
Well, some of the ones I just mentioned are the ones that I would highly recommend. And of course, I have Dr. Geyser, writing books with him and learning from him. His books are always great. I think William Lane Craig does a phenomenal job. Anything that he writes is well worth reading. I mentioned Lee Strobel, of course, C.S. Lewis, just classic there. I think also there's some good folks on the internet and some very good books that will help you get a good grasp of who God is and making arguments, metaphysical arguments for God, like Ed Feser's book, The Last Superstition, and he's got a great blog, Feser. If your viewers look him up, he's well worth reading. So there's plenty of resources out there.
You've done some Christian debating as well. I know you've debated, I say Christian debating, you're the Christian, and I know you debated the late Christopher Hitchens. What kind of advice would you give for those maybe who are interested in doing debate? These are the kind of things you need to be thinking about.
Well, I would say watch all of Craig's debates, because he's the master at it. I've only done 4 debates, so I'm not as schooled as he is on it. Anything by John Lennox, too. I forgot to mention John Lennox. John Lennox is just amazing. The guy, I think, if everyone was like John Lennox, the whole world would be Christianized. He is just so likable.
Class act.
He is just so likable and so knowledgeable. In fact, when someone watched the debate between Lennox and Dawkins, the reviewer said, watching John Lennox debate Richard Dawkins is like watching Santa Claus debate the devil. He's just so likable, and his books are so good too. So let me throw out a plug for him. It's just great stuff.
Yeah, he is definitely a humble man whom God's using. Tell us a little bit about your family, Frank.
Oh, my wife, Stephanie. We've been married coming up on 28 years now.
You sure?
Yeah, it's about 28. I know better than she does. She's not really into dates. We have 3 sons, 2 of them in the Air Force, officers in the Air Force, and another son just finishing up college as of this recording right now. So my wife and I get a raise after this year's up, and we're empty nesters. Yeah,
so there's empty nesting or getting a raise. That's good.
That's right.
Put that way.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the program, Frank. I think it's just kind of a final wrap up. I mean, how important is evangelism and keeping our spiritual life strong, kind of as a wrap up question or interview, as it relates to apologetics? I mean, if you're just going to get involved in apologetics and study that apart from evangelism, apart from the spiritual life, what are the potential consequences of that?
Well, I think apologetics is just a tool we use to do evangelism and to know God better, because that's our ultimate goal, is to know God and to make him known. Mm-hmm. And evangelism, or I should say apologetics, is just one method we use to do that. Now, it's commanded in Scripture. It's not an option.
Right.
We're supposed to do it. But if it's just all about getting answers and not knowing God better or not sharing that with anyone, what's the point? Mm-hmm. So I think it's a tool we use. It's not the end in itself. The end is always God. Mm-hmm. That's the end. We're to know God and to make him known. By the way, I forgot to mention one other guy that I find very helpful to listen to, and that, of course, is Ravi Zacharias. Absolutely. You can't not listen to Ravi. Whatever Ravi says, God reads. I mean, come on. So there's probably other people, J. Warner Wallace. There's many other people out there that are doing great work. In fact, J. Warner Wallace, I know you've had on the 1 Minute Apologist, and his book Cold Case Christianity is required reading. Paul Copan is another one. Mm-hmm. His books are great, and his book on Is God a Moral Monster solves a lot of problems, I think, that people had originally. So there's just so many people. Gary Habermas, man, is Gary just brilliant and just such a humble guy. GaryHabermas.com has some great stuff on it. So I'm standing on the shoulders of all these giants. When I'm doing what I'm doing, I try and take what they've done. Mike Lacona is another one that has some great work out there. I take what they've done and I try and give it to a general audience. And so I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, the work that I'm doing.
Well, you're doing a great job, and we really appreciate your heart and ministry out there, and keep up the great work, bud.
Thank you.
Yeah. Blow it up.